Hello audience. It's been a while since I've done anything with this car. Just been busy with everything else and it's just been sitting around. But with the price of fuel being what it is, I dug this thing back out a few weeks ago and I've been daily driving it. Because in stop and go city traffic, it's actually the most efficient of all the cars I own. So in this video, I'm going to tune it a little to try and get the most amount of power and efficiency out of it. Particularly, I'm going to rejet the carburetor, try and get the vacuum advance to work, and maybe adjust the valves. Now here's some parts that I bought. I got a new spark valve and a new main jet, about 2 sizes smaller than the one I'm using. Both of these I got from Mike's Carburetor Parts. It was, including shipping, about $10 for all this. Not too bad. Now, in the past, some of you have pointed out that the 200 actually has hydraulic lifters, so I shouldn't have to adjust them. Now that is true. This engine undoubtedly started out with hydraulic lifters, but for some unknown reason, somebody went through the trouble to swap them out with solid lifters. I didn't believe it at first either. I had to take the engine apart to find out. So this is old-fashioned style. Now, this isn't really a complete 200. There's some weird things about it. It's kind of a mix and match. Another thing you may notice by the really small intake runners is this is a really early cylinder head. I think it may have come off the original engine because it's got a 1960 casting date on it. So yeah, some weird stuff on this one. Now when I first put this engine together, I set the intakes at 4 thousandths and the exhaust at 6, because that's the universal standard from the 1920s, because that's just the way I do things. But that is way too tight for this engine, and driving it like that, I probably overheated and burned some of the valves, which I'll have to address later on. I later reset all these to 12 thousandths, but I read the book and they recommend 16 thousandths, which sounds like an awful lot to me, but they wrote it for some reason, so that's what I'm going to set it to. The book also recommends setting this when the engine is at normal operating temperature. The problem is this engine takes forever to warm up. So I drove it around a little this morning and it's kinda warm, so that'll just have to do. I suspect this is jetted a little too rich, reason being you can start it cold with little or no choke. Now compare that with the Impala, where even on a hot day, if that engine is cold, it won't even try to start unless the choke is all the way closed. And it needs to run for a good 30 seconds or so before it runs good enough to actually drive. Now, a lot of people will tell you that you actually have to jet the carburetors richer today because of today's California fuel has ethanol in it. Now, that is true. They do require a slightly richer mixture, but that's all assuming that the carburetor you have is already jetted perfectly. And in my experience, that's rarely ever the case. Usually with carburetors from the 60s on pack, they're almost always jetted too rich. Now it currently has a size 56 main jet. I ordered a 54, and we'll put it in and see what happens. If it's down on power, but we can fix it by choking it, well then it's too lean. If not, then we moved in the right direction. So, let's see what happens. here's the spark valve right here. Now, for those of you who don't know how this works, this distributor doesn't have centrifugal advance, it's vacuum only. So I believe to compensate for that, they made the vacuum a little more variable. Now the way it works is this vacuum feed going to the distributor, it gets vacuum through a restriction, so it doesn't get full vacuum. Then there's another passage that bypasses the restriction, but it's blocked by the spark valve. And then when vacuum gets above a certain point, it forces the valve open, which allows it to bypass the restriction and gives the distributor full vacuum for full advance. Now this one, when I got the car, the diaphragm was just ripped up and gone, so I couldn't find a replacement at the time, so I just filled it with silicone so that at least it wasn't a vacuum leak. And yes, this rubber hose is not authentic. I do have the original steel line, and I'll put on it as soon as I can find it. The lifters are noticeably louder. Well, drove it around a little today, and it's a little more difficult to start, but it runs pretty much exactly the same. I mean, it might have a little bit more power, but it certainly doesn't have any less, so we're moving in the right direction. Now, I'm going to drive it for a few days and see what I think of it. I don't know if we're going to jet it leaner or leave it alone or jet it a little richer or what, so we'll see. Anyway, that's it for this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.